well. So we'll make sure to record this so that we can send it out afterwards. Today, so we're continuing our agronomy series every Tuesday morning here. And today you got me, and then I believe next week, let's see, are we taking a break, or I think we got one more there right ahead of Thanksgiving. And then actually I'll be gone after that. So then Darren will take the next one after that. So we're moving right along here in the agronomy series. The next section that we're going to focus in on is around fungicides. Okay. And when I was putting this together, there's three major groups of fungicides that we deal with. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through, here's all the ones that fit in this category. We will do that, but I want to spend some time tackling some specific diseases that we see that are becoming more of issues in Iowa. And in particular, we're going to spend some time talking quite a bit about tar spot, because tar spot is one of those things where you may not have had it yet. I'm guessing it is in your area. And we haven't necessarily had a season yet where tar spot conditions are perfect to the point where we get quite a bit of tar spot. So we're gonna have a discussion around some of the tar spot things that we were seeing, especially this year. A lot of the tar spot came in very late, and up in Northeast Iowa in particular, it did cause some pretty significant yield losses in fields where there wasn't a fungicide applied. So we're gonna spend some time talking about that. One of the first things that I always want to talk about when we're talking about fungicides is this disease triangle. And I know before you go and zone this out, guys, this is really, really important. Okay, and I don't think a lot of people truly understand what this means. I mean, it's such a simple concept, but it describes the entire interaction that the corn plant or the bean plant has to have in order to get a disease. Okay, and realistically, the size of the triangle is how much of the disease that we're going to see in a particular year. Okay, so you have to have the pathogen, you have to have a favorable environment, and you have to have a susceptible host. Okay. Now, you look at the susceptible host in particular, okay? A lot of our varieties, a lot of our hybrids have been bred for disease tolerance, right? And so some of these varieties don't necessarily, or hybrids don't necessarily have the susceptibility of other hybrids or varieties, okay? Think of something like a white mold, for example. Susceptible host, if you have a soybean plant that's really, really aggressive, doesn't have any kind of disease package there, no white mold protection, you have a very susceptible host, right? Favorable environment for white mold. Again, if you look at that, if we get any kind of cool, wet weather right around when the plant is flowering, that's when we're going to see a higher potential for disease. Okay? And this year in particular, I had right around R1, I started to think that we might see some white mold up in Northeast Iowa, and we definitely did. And the reason why is because even though we had been dry up till that point, at R1, when the infection takes place, that's when we got cool and wet. Okay, and it only lasted a couple weeks, but that's all the longer it took. Okay, and then finally you got to have the pathogen, which makes sense, right? And we definitely have the pathogen. In the case of white mold, we definitely have the pathogen in most of these fields. Okay, another key characteristic is time. Okay, in the past couple of years, we've actually had very good conditions for gray leaf spot. However, from a timing aspect, the conditions didn't necessarily carry through. So we had that same situation with the white mold as we did for the gray leaf spot. We were actually getting a little bit hotter and actually a little bit wet around tassel. We caught a few rains, and if those rains would have continued, I would have expected to see a fairly bad gray leaf spot year. And the reason why is because it was ideal conditions for it. But the reason we didn't get it is because we didn't have enough time necessarily to move that disease along and have it progress. Okay. Now, I do want to spend some time talking about tar spot, because I think tar spot, guys, is going to be one of those diseases that we're going to be dealing with here in the future. And unfortunately, a lot of our hybrids do not have very good genetic resistance to it. Okay, it's one of those ones that's brand new. You don't have a lot of genetic resistance. So without the genetic resistance, I do see some issues. Okay. Now, certain areas get it a lot worse than Iowa. You look at like places like Illinois, and then actually out in Michigan, they get a fair amount of tar spot every year. So they've had a lot better look at it than we necessarily have here in Iowa. And so I pulled some data from Dr. Chilvers out of Michigan here. And he went through, and this is 2020. I haven't seen his 2021 data yet. But he went through and kind of did a synopsis of some of the information that he has put together on tar spot. And I'm just going to show you some of this data and what they're sharing out there in Michigan. And again, the reason why we're seeing this in Michigan is because they have much more favorable conditions year after year after year for tar spot. Okay, so first of all, when you start looking at the fungicides themselves, these newer, longer lasting fungicides do tend to do better than the not as long lasting. Okay, now this is an area under the disease curve here. So basically what this is showing, the lower the bar on this chart, the less the disease in the field. Okay, so you can see that our untreated check was definitely the worst. It had the most amount of disease. And then you can see where a lot of these other ones shake out. Now, one word of caution, just because, you know, this one's slightly worse than, for example, this one, or this one's slightly worse than this one, you'll notice they are still statistically the same. Right? And that's a really important key here, guys. If they are statistically the same, then based on random chance, any one of these could be identical. So really, there's not a whole lot of difference in the different fungicides. There is a few exceptions. You can see Headline Amp did not perform nearly as well as like a Veltima or a Mirvis Neo. And so you can, well, actually it performed the same as the Veltima at 7 fluid ounces. At the 10 fluid ounces for Veltima and for Mirvis Neo, those two fungicides did statistically outperform them. Okay, here's one on stock integrity. You can see where that one lies. Here's the most important one though, here is on yield. And you can see that definitely our newer fungicides, and for those of you guys that aren't aware of this, Delaro Plus Privilege or Luna Privilege here, this is Delaro Complete, okay? And as you can see, our newer, longer lasting fungicides are doing better than some of our older fungicides in general, okay? Not a lot of difference when you start looking at statistics, but most of them did outperform that untreated check statistically. That's what we're going for here. Okay, so in the end with tar spot, the question often gets asked, well, what's the threshold for tar spot? Is it just one lesion? What is it? Okay. You need to be watching for tar spot because it does infect and move very, very quickly. Okay, so if you're seeing less than 1 in 100 plants infected, at that point, you're just going to wait. And honestly, you're going to have to really be looking to see this. Okay, whereas if greater than 50% of the plants are infected from the ear leaf on up, then we definitely need to get some sort of fungicide application out there. Okay, now another good question that we've had is on the timing for tar spot. Okay, a lot of people have tried to go earlier, thinking that that tar spot comes in very early. But from what I've seen in Iowa, our tar spot is actually coming in late. Okay, late in the season, and actually, out at Michigan State, they were seeing the same thing. Now, I'll give you some exceptions. So 2020, that was definitely the case. In 2019, it did come in very, very early. So those earlier applications made sense. Okay, and so I think when you start looking at when we should make a fungicide application for tar spot, I think what we need to do is make sure we're scouting those fields and looking for the disease. Okay. Now, I've also often been told too, well, Kyle, if you see it, it's too late. That's not the case, guys. It doesn't move in the plant. It's got to infect on the outside. Okay. But understand that it doesn't take a whole lot of lesions to get moving very, very quickly. Okay. So you need to be watching very diligently. Okay. But the reason I bring this up for timing is it's actually suggested that some of these infections are coming in late enough that we're seeing the fungicide break later on in the season. Okay, so this is our disease index here, and you can see this is for the ear leaf, and you can see that the later applications actually did a little bit better at controlling that tar spot than the earlier applications. Okay, now the unfortunate, yeah, go ahead.
Do they know what their right weather and conditions are for tar spot? Seems like we get it every year to some extent.
Yep. Good question, Paul. So what's the ideal conditions for tar spot? Realistically, Paul, if we have a good white mold year, I would expect we'd have a good tar spot year. More of a cooler, wetter season. But I will tell you as well that tar spot's not nearly as sensitive to the heat as what white mold is. So it will withstand a little bit higher temperatures, but more that cool and wet is ideal. And I think that's part of the reason why we saw it come in so late this year, is because we did have a little section in the middle where we got a little bit cool and wet, but really we did start to pick up on some late season rains and a little bit cooler weather later in the season. And that's the reason we saw that tar spot come in late. So more of a cooler, wetter season is what we expect to see for a bad tar spot year. So as far as timing, guys, my general recommendation, okay, I personally like to see that fungicide on slightly ahead of tassel. Now, you might go, well, Tyler, that's not what this data is showing. Not necessarily for tar spot, okay, but here's the problem. If we were to wait till that R3, R4 timing here, we're going to be too late on some of our other diseases out there. Okay, and unfortunately, a lot of the data would suggest that we're actually missing that window for a lot of our other disease potential. Okay, so unfortunately for tar spot, my lead recommendation, especially corn on corn, would be to go a fungicide slightly ahead of tassel. And then if you start seeing tar spot come in, or if conditions are ideal for tar spot, coming in at that R3 timing and making another application at that point. I know that's not ideal. I know it's hard enough to get a plane in here to do one application, much less two. But I think that's what's going to give us our best and most consistent results. Okay. Now, fungicide application timing is really, really important because remember, you got to remember, guys, fungicides, although some claim to be somewhat mobile, and I will agree, some of them will move, they are not true systemic chemistries. So basically, whatever leaf material is out at the time of application is what's going to be out there. Okay. Now, we had some interesting data back in, here's 2019 data, where in the answer plots, we did V10 and R1 application. Okay. And this is with Veltima. And you can see that we actually only had about a 1.4 bushel advantage to the R1, which isn't really all that significant. I actually was very excited about this data because BASF was saying that, you know, there was really good results from this little bit earlier timing. I can get over it with a sprayer, no problem. And so we were getting very decent results. Okay. Now, this really shows you the importance, though, of not just looking at one field study in 1 year, because when we repeated this study back in 2020, we found a larger difference. Now, it wasn't statistically significant. There was quite a bit of variability in this data, but we did see that there was quite a bit of difference in the results here. Now, this is significant difference at 95% confidence. I bet you if we lowered that to 90% confidence, we probably would see statistical differences. It was about a roughly about a 6 bushel difference between VT or V10 and R1. Okay, so the R1 timing or slightly ahead of it is going to be critical. And the reason why, guys, is because of the fact that you have fungicides that really don't move in the plant. Okay, so whatever leaves are out at the time of application, those are the leaves you're going to protect. Okay, and by the way, BASF actually found much the same thing. Okay, so this is some data that I received from BASF. You can see, and this is from BASF, University of Lincoln, Nebraska, Iowa State University, and on-farm trials. You can see that V12 to V14 was at about 13.6. VT to R2 was the most consistent at 16.7. And then we do see that yield effect start to taper off in those later applications. Still not bad in those later applications, but not ideal. Okay. Your most consistent results are going to be that VT time period. Okay. Moving into some of the keys on fungicides. So there's two different types of fungicide. There's a preventative and a curative. Okay. And some of these premixes have a little bit of both. Basically, a preventative prevents the fungus from infecting the tissue. Now, one of the key things we have to remember, foliar diseases, that lesion in itself is not the disease. Okay. The lesion itself is the plant's response to the disease. Okay, it's basically the cells dying around that disease period. Now, you ask, why is that important? The reason that's important is because usually the infection of that disease, that infection of that fungus, occurs much before we actually see the lesion on the plant. Okay, usually if you're seeing the lesion, that infection took place 8 to 10 days before. So if you are using a preventative fungicide, understand that a foliar disease can continue to look like it's getting worse because a lot of those disease fungus has already infected into the plant. And at that point, once the actual fungus has infected into the plant, these preventative type fungicides, specifically the strobilurins, don't have an effect on that disease. Okay, so that's why you're seeing a lot of these premixes coming in with a curative. Okay, the curative basically, the fungicide itself can actually kill the disease once it's infected. Okay, now once the lesion is formed, it's done, right? It's not like I can apply this fungicide and it'll remove that lesion, because again, the lesion is the response of the plant. It's not the disease itself. Okay, and all we're doing with this curative type fungicide is controlling the disease, the actual fungus, the actual pathogen. Okay, and so the curative does have some reach back, and so it will stop that fungus dead in its tracks during the actual latency period or the infection period that takes place. Okay. Now, when you start looking at fungicides, fungicides are mobile. Some of them are, but most of them are going to be mobile through translaminar movement. Okay, and all that means is it's going to move from the top of the leaf towards the bottom of the leaf to give you protection on that leaf. Okay, and beyond that, fungicides don't move a whole lot in the plant. Now, there are some exceptions, something like, for example, an azoxystrobin. Azoxystrobin does move within the plants. Okay, but azoxystrobin is a little unique, and it moves in the xylem of the plant. So it's actually going to move from the leaf out to the leaf tip. Okay, but other than that, it's not going to do a lot of movement. It's not going to move from old leaves to new leaves. Okay, so with any of these fungicides, we want to have as many of these leaves out as we possibly can. Okay, now there's quite a few different fungicide groups, but there's only 3 major ones that we're using today. Okay, you got your strobilurins. These are preventative type fungicides only. They have a long residual activity, generally a lot longer than some of our other fungicides. Examples would be headline quadris and trifloxystrobin. Okay, we got triazoles. These would be the group 3s. These have a curative and a protective. They do have shorter residual control than what the strobilurins. One exception would be actually the triazole in Veltima, so Revysol. That one has a tendency to stick around a lot longer than any of these other triazoles. So I will give an exception to that one. The rest of these, though, are shorter residual control, but they do have a curative type capability to them. They will actually kill that disease even after it's infected. Okay, we got our group 7. So this is our last one. These are actually one of our newer fungicides, and you're starting to see quite a few different options coming out. So you're seeing, and I'll go through specific ones, but Xemium or lunar type product families. They offer broad spectrum protection. They do tend to last a little bit longer than the triazoles, but maybe not quite as long with the strobilurins, although there is quite a few different, I would say there's varying effectiveness of each one of these, because there's certain SDHIs that actually last a fairly long time. Okay. Now, when you look at the strobies versus the triazoles versus the premix, strobilurins, preventative only. Usually with the premixes, they are put in at a little bit lower rate, so we don't see as good of activity on them. We also do have a little bit of resistance showing up to strobilurins. Okay, I don't know when the next time we're going to have a significant frog eye leaf spot year is, but in some of the work that Dr. Mueller's done out of Iowa State University, they've actually shown that almost every lesion that they've brought in from frog eye leaf spot problem fields has shown resistance to strobilurin type chemistries. Okay, so if you are going to be spraying fungicides on soybeans, we need to make sure that we have a premix that has, let's say, either an SDHI or has that triazole in there to help with that. Okay. Also, another key thing that a strobilurin has, it does have what we call a plant health effect. Okay, and this terminology was definitely coined by BASF back in the headline days. And basically what that effect is that when you are in a condition absence of disease, we're still seeing a yield benefit to putting out that strobilurin chemistry. Okay, and I would say that headline is one of those that's probably the best at showing that plant health effect. What it's doing in the plant, guys, is basically it's slowing down the respiration rate of that plant. And that's what's leading to that higher yield potential without, or in the absence of disease, is because of the fact that we're seeing that plant health effect of slowing down the respiration rate of that plant. Now, one thing that I find is interesting, and why I find this data so valuable, Winfield United has put a lot of effort into going out and spraying fungicides on corn and coming up with a response to fungicide score. Okay, most of the other scores that you see around plant health are just based on the disease package that that hybrid has. But here's the thing, I don't think that all of the yield is necessarily from a fungicide. All the yield effect is actually coming from the disease. I think some of it has to do with this plant health effect. Okay, and that's why I find the response to fungicide data so compelling out in the answer plots, is because it's not just a score based on the tolerance to a specific disease. We actually go out and spray the fungicide and measure the yield effect that that fungicide has. Okay, therefore, going in and taking it into account this plant health effect. So paying attention to those responsive fungicide scores, especially as we go into this next year where fungicides are probably going to be a little more expensive, can really help you dial in where you're going to see the best response with these various fungicides. Okay, now this looks very complicated. This is straight out of the crop protection guide, looking at each one of these various fungicides and where or how good of an effect it has on these various different types of diseases. Okay, and you can see all these various ones for both corn and soybeans. The only reason I put this in here is so that when I send out this, you guys can go back and look at which diseases each one of these controls. Okay, some particular ones that I'd pay attention to, tar spot in corn here. I'd look at northern corn leaf blight and gray leaf spot as well. On the soybean side of things, I really look at white mold. Okay, there are certain ones that are very good on white mold. There's other ones that aren't. Okay, one of actually our best ones that we have on white mold is actually Endura. The key is, guys, with white mold is timing. Okay, you want to have it on right at flowering, if not just ahead. Because you got to remember with white mold, the infection is taking place as the flower senesces. Okay, so if you're right on at R1, you should be able to protect that flower and prevent that infection from occurring. Okay, but timing is absolutely everything. Okay, Endura is going to have the best control on it, followed by actually Approach is fairly decent on it as well. Mirvis Neo is at this point, when this data came out, and I'll have to look in the new crop protection guide when that comes out, was unlabeled at this point. I'm sure that one, Mirvis Neo, actually has fairly decent control, as actually does Delaro Complete. So I'll be interested to see the updated charts here so we can see what it does on white mold. Okay, here's a efficacy chart continued on white mold there, or on soybeans. Okay, as for application timing, we talked a little bit about this already, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But one of the things, guys, that I'd say is really important is identifying where the yield comes from. And luckily, Darren I don't know, do you have just too much time on your hands, or is that the reason you do this demo?
I think it provides a good visual.
I think it does too, but boy, that must take you. How long does it take you to do each one of these plots?
Well, the last time I did it, I had my boys out there with me, so it goes a lot faster with two teenagers.
There you go. What you're seeing is I need to get some labor in there to help me.
That's right.
All right. This is a really cool demo, and I'm glad Darren did do this. I'd like to do this out in my plots as well, but unfortunately, at this time of year, or at the time of year that this needs to be done, I'm usually running around doing other stuff. Basically, what Darren did is he went out and took the bottom leaves off of one plot, took the top leaves off another plot, and then in this one, he left only the ear leaf. Okay, and it just goes to show where the yield is coming from, guys. Above the ear leaf is absolutely critical to getting and maintaining yield. Okay, so you'll see when we had no leaves removed, we averaged about 218 bushels based on hand yield estimates here. Remember, it's hand yield estimates. When we removed the bottom leaves, we ended up at 217. Okay, so realistically, there was no difference between the top and bottom leaves. And this is where I often tell people, they get some hail in the plant early, something like that. Guys, realistically, if it doesn't reduce rows around, realistically, you're not going to see much of a yield hit to having damage at that point. Okay, those bottom leaves, even if we have a little bit of disease or a little bit of insect feeding or something like that, those bottom leaves don't necessarily contribute to much to yield. Okay, but as we continue to go on through the year, these top leaves are what provides us the most amount of yield response. Okay, so when we remove the top part of that plant, it averaged about 159 bushels, so a significant yield response. And by the way, if you remove both the top and the bottom part of that plant, we averaged 83 bushels. So there was a significant yield response to removal of that leaf tissue. And I think what this is really showing, guys, is we need to do a really good job of protecting those upper leaves in that plant. Now, there is also a big difference in our fungicides and some of the newer fungicides versus some of the older fungicides. Okay, so here you can see our untreated check. Here's our premium fungicide, mid-tier fungicide, and then our generic fungicides here. And you can see the effect that has on our yield response. Okay, it's about it was roughly about 2 bushels per acre to go to that premium fungicide. Okay, so that's why I've been recommending going to that. Now, some of you guys might look at that and go, well, is that enough to pay for it? Well, definitely with $5 corn, it definitely is. But one thing you also have to consider is these premium fungicides do tend to hang on a little bit longer. And so one of the things that I'm really interested to see this year in some of the fungicide data, when that starts coming in, is how much it had an effect, because in 2021, what we saw was anything that could hold on just a little bit later in the season. And I think Andy's on here, but one of the things that he's been talking about is the fact that some of these later season hybrids outperformed earlier season hybrids, mainly just because of when we got the rain. We have that wider window of grain fill, and we actually saw that those later hybrids did tend to respond better to that later rainfall, because of the fact that we're able to get sugars into the plant, start producing more grain. I'm wondering if we're going to see a bigger difference this year in the premium versus some of these generic type fungicides, because of the fact that we had those later season rains, and we could see a bigger effect this year. Okay. Here's just another look at some of the data broken out by disease level. You'll notice in the higher diseases, this is where those premium fungicides really starts to settle themselves out. There was a difference of 3 bushels here between the premium versus mid-tier fungicide. And actually, even between the mid-tier and the generic fungicide, we're still seeing a bushel, roughly a little over a bushel difference there, a little under a bushel, I should say. Okay, moderate still had pretty good yield differences here, about 3 bushels, a little under 3 bushels here in the between the premium and mid-tier. And then as we went down, you can see some of the differences there. It was about a 1 bushel difference there between the mid-tier and generic. The low disease incidence, guys, is where we don't necessarily see as much difference between the premium, mid-tier, and generic type fungicides. Okay, we just weren't seeing it. Now, the problem that we have is we just don't know what year we're going to have a low disease instance, moderate, or high. So that's why I tend to like to be more on that premium side, because I know I have a lot more upward potential of that fungicide application. Okay. Fungicide timing, we already spent a little bit of time on that. Here's fungicide applications on soybeans. You can see some of the yield responses there. Also, make sure, and we're going to spend more time on Master Lock when we get into the adjuvant section, but guys, make sure that we have decent fungicide adjuvants in with that fungicide. So Master Lock is the #1 fungicide for fungicide applications. The reason why is because we get more down through the canopy. So this is something that Darren actually did a couple years back in 2019, looking at the penetration. And I know at our answer plots in Eastern Iowa, we did this live demonstration out in the field. But it's just about getting more down into the canopy so that we get better coverage. Now, some of you guys might be asking, well, why do I need to get it lower in the canopy if, in fact, we don't necessarily need to control the diseases in the lower part of that plant? The reason why is because we need to get it down to that ear leaf. So if I go back here, here's our middle part of our canopy, guys. With just straight water, we're hardly getting any of that fungicide down to the mid part of that canopy. Okay, remember, this is the ear leaf. Okay, versus with Master Lock, we're getting much better coverage throughout that entire canopy. Okay, and of course, it doesn't contain nonylphenol ethoxylate, so it doesn't cause arrested ear. All right. So as far as the 3 different fungicide classes, we have triazoles. Remember, triazoles have both preventative and curative. Okay, there's quite a few of these, quite a few of them in this category. Also, one thing you're going to notice between today's presentation and actually next week's presentation is a lot of these fungicides that we're using foliarly, we're actually also seeing that in furrow or as seed treatments as well. Okay, and you'll start to see some combinations. For example, flutriafol is actually in Xyway, for example. Okay, so there's quite a few different ones in here. A lot of the group 3s tend to be paired with group 11s, so that the strobilurins. Okay, and one of the reasons why we see a lot of the pairings of group 3s and group 11s is because of the fact that that group 11 extends the residual control of that fungicide, and you get that plant health effect as well. Okay, so you can see all the different ones in here. A lot of these are a combination either of group 3 or 11, or they're a combination of all 3 modes of action. Okay, one of them that is a little bit of an exception is this Lucento. Okay, Lucento is actually a combination of a group 3 and a group 7. Okay, and it's one of the few that doesn't actually have a strobilurin type chemistry in it. So that is a unique combination there. Okay. Triazoles, what triazoles do, they're DMI inhibitors. So basically what they do is they prevent the cell membrane from forming these DMI type receptors here, and it prevents the formulation of sterols. Okay, and a sterol basically is part of the cell membrane, and so we end up dissolving that membrane away. Okay, now the key with triazoles, again, it's a reach back effect. It will kill a fungicide or fungus that is already developed within the plant, and it's because it does attack these cell membranes here. Okay. Basically, with any of these fungicides, guys, our recommendation is Master Lock. Aerially, we put 4 fluid ounces per acre. Ground, we put 6.4 fluid ounces. Okay, and the reason that we're putting more through the ground is because of the higher water volume. Okay, that's why we need more of that Master Lock in the tank. And guys, this is actually true of a lot of our drift control agents. You look at Interlock, for example. Okay, the use rate, common use rate there on the label, it says 4 to 6 ounces. Okay, some people have decided that they're going to go 2 fluid ounces. Guys, 2 fluid ounces works fine when you're doing when all you want is drift control and you're only doing 10 gallons per acre. But a lot of our gallons per acre have moved up to get us better protection and better coverage. And so now that we're in that 15 to 20 gallons per acre, my general recommendation for most conditions is 4 fluid ounces of Interlock. If you get very high winds and very high carrier volumes, I recommend going up to that 6 fluid ounce rate. Okay, but it all has to do with the gallons per acre that you're spraying. Okay, our group 7s, this would be our SDHI inhibitors here. Very few of these are brought out as individual products. The one exception is going to be Endura. And Endura, again, is that one that actually probably has the best white mold control on the market. And I would say A lot of our white mold control overall, guys, is going to be coming from this SDHI inhibitor. Okay, you get a little bit on the strobilurin side. You look at like Approach, for example, but for the most part, the SDHI inhibitor is going to be the one that's giving us the best control. Okay, but there's quite a few that also fit in this category. You got Trivapro, Praxor, Revitec. You got Delaro Complete, Bifexin, Bixafen for Lucento, and then you got Miravis Neo here. You'll also know that notice that some of these active ingredients may be somewhat familiar to you. So, for example, Flupyram in Delaro Complete, you'll notice Flupyram is actually a levo. Same mode of action, same active ingredient. Okay, same with Saltro is down here in Miravis Neo. Okay, so a lot of this stuff is just recycled. We use it in seed treatments. We use it in other things. So both of those, Flupyram and I always tell people, say the active ingredient with confidence and nobody will question you, but boy, this one's a mouthful. So Pitiflumetophen. Pitiflumetophen, yeah, sounds right. Sound good to you, Darren?
I think you nailed it, man. Just say it with confidence.
As long as you say it with confidence. Oh boy. So, but both of those are fairly effective on SDS. And so that's why you're seeing those in seed treatment packages. Okay, now SDHI inhibitors are a little bit different. They actually affect the respiration of the fungus itself. And so what you'll see here, what it affects is this ubiquinone, and it stops the conversion and the ability of the plant or of the fungus to use the electron transport chain to develop energy. And so basically it starves that fungus out and kills it that way. Okay. SDHI inhibitors will have that same reach back effect that the triazoles have. It is a curative and a preventative. And of course, master lock with each one of those as well. Our final one is our group 11. So this would be the strobilurins. You got azoxystrobin, picoxystrobin, floxystrobin, paroxystrobin, and trifloxystrobin. All of these, quite a few of these are in various premixes as well. You can see all of the different ones in these categories here. You'll see in particular floxystrobins in 4 ticks. So you saw that. Now you'll also notice that Vortex is actually the same as Preemptor. And so when I believe as FMC bought that molecule, they rebranded and relabeled that one. And so that's what that is. Okay. Another comparable product would be their, they also took that same triazole and made it into a few of their other products as well. Okay, Miravis Neo, Trivapro, all of those have azoxystrobin. The biggest difference between Trivapro and Miravis Neo, if I were in the north, I would say you're probably going to have better luck with Miravis Neo than you will with Trivapro on corn. Okay, once you get down into the southern part of Iowa, where we start to see things like rust every year, in particular, some of that southern rust that blows up from the south, I think you're going to have better luck with Trivapro over Miravis Neo. Okay, so if you have rust, or if that is a factor that you're considering, Trivapro is going to be the better option. If you don't, I would stick with that Miravis Neo probably actually both corn and soybeans as well. Okay. Also, one thing you'll start to notice is that specific companies tend to have specific specific active ingredients. So you'll notice that most of these products that we're seeing with azoxystrobin are coming from Syngenta. Picoxystrobin, you'll see, is a Corteva based. Floxystrobin is more of a, well, FMC bought that one. Pyroxystrobin is going to be more of your BASF camp. And then trifloxystrobin is going to be Bayer and some of the Bayer products. And it does break out that way pretty easily here. The group 11 strobilurins, they are really important in preventing the ATP production by disrupting the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. Okay, and one thing you'll notice with that is this same place, the same ATP production area is actually also in the plant as well. And that's the reason you get that plant health effect, is it slows down the respiration rate of that corn plant, specifically at night. So where you're going to see this most is when you have high or hot, dry conditions. You will see more of the plant health benefit as opposed to really bad disease years. So also, we are seeing some resistance to this. So definitely, and this is part of the reason I think why we're seeing so many premixes is because of the amount of resistance that we're seeing. Basically, what it's shutting down is this part of the electron transport chain, which does starve that fungi out. Again, though, it is only a preventative type fungicide. Okay, we'll have master lock with every one of these. And with that, if you guys have no other questions, we are going to, we're going to stop the recording here 1 second.